Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The cold whisper on my neck isn't the wind. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The old Harrington estate loomed at the end of a narrow, winding road, shrouded in the shadows of towering pines. Eleanor Ellie Harrington parked her car by the rusted wrought iron gates, the engine's hum dying away into an unsettling silence. The air was still too cold for late autumn, a chill that gnawed at her skin and made her breath puff out in faint clouds. She pulled her coat tighter around her, eyes scanning the sprawling, dilapidated mansion before her. It had been over a decade since she'd last seen it, and even then, the place had a sinister edge that made her uneasy. But this time, it wasn't just unease. It was something darker, something that sent a shiver down her spine as she approached the front door. The key her grandmother had left her slid easily into the lock, and with a creak, the heavy door swung open, revealing the dusty, dimly lit foyer. The air inside was stale, the kind of oppressive atmosphere that had lingered long after life had vacated the rooms. Ellie hesitated, but the nagging sense of duty, coupled with her financial desperation, pushed her forward. The house was a labyrinth of memories, each room steeped in echoes of a past she had long tried to forget. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her boots as she explored, her footsteps reverberating in the empty hallways. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, stern and distant, reminding her of the house's rules Ellie had often ignored during her childhood visits. Now, the silence was overwhelming, every creak and groan of the house amplified in the stillness. Unpacking her bags, Ellie tried to shake off the growing unease. This was just a house, after all, albeit a crumbling relic of a bygone era. But as she settled in, she couldn't ignore the cold draft that seemed to follow her, the way the shadows lengthened unnaturally as dusk fell. It was when she was finally lying in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, that she heard a faint whisper, just on the edge of perception. Her breath caught, and she sat up, straining to listen. The wind, she told herself. But then it came again, unmistakably close to her ear, a cold, disembodied voice that sent her heart racing. Ellie. She bolted upright, her pulse pounding in her ears. The room was empty, but the whisper lingered in the cold air, wrapping around her like a ghostly embrace. Chapter 2. The Unsettling History. Ellie sat motionless in bed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The whisper had been so real, so close, that it felt like icy fingers had brushed against her neck. She waited, ears straining for any sound in the oppressive silence, but all she heard was the ticking of an old clock down the hall. After what felt like an eternity, she finally convinced herself to move. She fumbled for the bedside lamp, flooding the room with a soft, warm light that did little to dispel the lingering dread. The whisper, the voice that called her name, it had to be her imagination. Stress, exhaustion, and the eerie isolation of the estate were playing tricks on her. But as the days passed, Ellie's attempts to dismiss the incident only made the eerie occurrences more difficult to ignore. Doors that she was certain she'd closed were found ajar, as if someone or something was passing through the house at night. The whisper, once faint, became more frequent, more insistent, filling the cold, empty rooms with an unsettling presence. Sometimes it called her name, other times it was unintelligible, a distorted murmur that sent shivers down her spine. Determined to find some logical explanation, Ellie decided to explore the house further. The attic, a place she had always avoided as a child, seemed the best place to start. She climbed the narrow, creaky stairs that led to the attic, each step amplifying the pounding of her heart. The door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a space thick with dust and cobwebs. Boxes and old furniture were piled haphazardly, remnants of a forgotten past. As she rummaged through the boxes, Ellie uncovered a trove of old journals and documents, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. She began to read, each entry revealing more of the Harrington family's disturbing history. There were accounts of strange occurrences, madness that gripped her ancestors, unexplained disappearances, and always the whispers that seemed to haunt the estate. One journal, written in a shaky hand, detailed a curse tied to the land, a debt that the family had failed to pay. The further Ellie read, the more the words began to unnerve her. The whispers, it seemed, had plagued her family for generations. They were not just figments of her imagination, they were a part of the estate's dark legacy. The realization sent a cold wave of fear crashing over her, but she couldn't stop reading. Her grandmother's name appeared frequently, along with references to a sacrifice that had to be made to keep the curse at bay. The final entry was particularly chilling, a note scrawled in the margin. Warning, the debt must be paid or the whispers will take what is owed. Ellie's skepticism, once her shield, began to crack under the weight of these revelations. She found herself jumping at every creak and groan of the house, her mind replaying the disturbing entries she had read. At night, the whispering intensified, growing louder, more demanding, as if the house itself was trying to communicate with her. Shadows that had once lingered at the edge of her vision began to take shape, a fleeting figure that seemed to watch her from the corners of darkened rooms. Sleep became elusive, her nights spent tossing and turning, haunted by the voice that now felt like a constant companion. Ellie's once firm grip on reality began to slip, the line between what was real and what was imagined blurring into a terrifying blend of fear and uncertainty. The cold, disembodied whisper was no longer just a curiosity. It was a harbinger of something far more sinister, something that seemed to be getting closer with each passing day. Chapter 3: The Investigation. Ellie's sleep-deprived mind whirled as she descended the attic stairs, her grip tightening around the journal she clutched like a talisman. The whispers, now a constant background murmur, seemed to taunt her, echoing off the cold, empty walls. Each gust of wind that rattled the old windows felt like a sinister message. The sense of dread was almost palpable, a thick fog that seemed to seep into every corner of the estate. Determined to find answers, Ellie ventured into town the next morning, her resolve hardened by the unsettling discoveries from the attic. The local library was a quaint, dusty place, filled with the scent of old paper and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Ellie scanned the rows of historical records and newspapers, seeking anything that might shed light on the estate's dark legacy. As she pored over the brittle pages, her frustration grew. There were snippets of information, mentions of unexplained phenomena and disappearances, but nothing concrete. Her breakthrough came when she spoke with Mrs. Green, the town historian, a frail woman with eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. Mrs. Green's face tightened as Ellie mentioned her grandmother's name. The Harringtons, she began slowly, as if weighing her words carefully. There are stories, old tales of a curse. Your great aunt, Lydia, she vanished when she was just a child. Some say she was taken by a spirit that dwells in the woods surrounding your estate. It's not a story people like to talk about. Ellie's heart raced. A spirit? What happened to her? Mrs. Green shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. No one knows. The family tried to keep it quiet, but there were rumors, dark things. The estate, it's been a place of sorrow. You should leave before it's too late. The warning was clear, but Ellie's curiosity was stronger than her fear. She left the library with a new sense of purpose, determined to piece together the fragments of her family's history. As she drove back to the estate, Her mind was plagued by cryptic messages from the whispering voice. It seemed to know her every thought, feeding on her growing paranoia. Back at the house, Ellie's isolation grew more profound. She avoided her own reflection in the cracked mirrors and refused to look too closely at the shadows that flitted just out of sight. The whispers had become direct, almost conversational. They warned her of danger, of impending doom, their tone dripping with malice. The cold drafts in the house intensified, and Ellie's sense of reality began to warp, the estate's decay mirroring her own mental unraveling. Her attempts to rationalize her fears were futile. The whispers were no longer just in her head. They were a presence, a looming threat that seemed to take form in the corners of her vision. Each night, the shadows grew longer, the whispers louder, until Ellie was consumed by a growing sense of dread that nothing could dispel. Desperation drove her to dig deeper into her family's dark past, even as the estate itself seemed to conspire against her. The more she uncovered, the more she felt like a pawn in a malevolent game, the house's decaying walls closing in around her, as if to ensure that she never escaped its grasp. Chapter 4. The Descent. The creeping shadows of dusk seemed to press closer each evening, wrapping Ellie in their chilling embrace. The whispers, now a constant, malevolent presence, had become an unbearable burden. Her nights were filled with fragmented, haunting visions. She saw her grandmother's gaunt face peering through the darkness, her eyes hollow and accusing. Her long-lost aunt, Lydia, appeared as a spectral child, her form shifting and distorting with every glance. And then, the most unsettling vision of all, herself, twisted and grotesque, staring back with eyes that held a depth of despair Ellie couldn't comprehend. Ellie's waking hours were no respite. The whisper had evolved into a sinister voice, speaking directly to her fears and regrets. It taunted her with memories she had long buried, dredging up guilt and sorrow she thought she had left behind. Objects in the house seemed to take on a life of their own. A vase toppled from a shelf without explanation, and doors that Ellie had securely closed were found ajar, as though mocking her attempts to maintain control. The shadowy figure that once flitted at the edge of her vision now appeared closer, almost tangible. Ellie would catch fleeting glimpses of it in the corners of her eyes, a dark shape that moved with a predatory grace. It was as though the entity was drawing nearer, feeding off her fear, becoming stronger with every anxious breath she took. Desperation clawed at her sanity. Ellie questioned her own perceptions, wondering if the estate's malignant influence was distorting her reality, or if she was succumbing to the same madness that had plagued her family. Her days were a blur of dread, her nights a tortured symphony of whispers and shadows. The boundaries between reality and hallucination grew increasingly blurred, each moment fraught with an intensity that threatened to unravel her completely. Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Ellie began to scour the estate more meticulously. It was during one of her desperate searches that she discovered a hidden door in the basement, cleverly concealed behind a false wall. Her heart pounded as she pried it open, revealing a small, untouched room that seemed to be frozen in time. Inside, she found remnants of her missing aunt's life, an old bed, a child's toy, and an assortment of belongings that spoke of a life abruptly interrupted. At the center of the room was a small desk, and atop it, a diary. Ellie's hands trembled as she opened it, the pages yellowed and delicate. The entries were fragmented, reflecting a growing paranoia and fear. The final entry, however, was chillingly abrupt, ending with a hurried scrawl. "The whispers are coming for me. I can't escape them. They're inside my head. They know my fears. I hear them even now. Why won't they stop? Why do they want me?" Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she read the last line over and over. The diary had belonged to Lydia, and the terror that had gripped her aunt was now seeping into Ellie's own reality. The whispers had not only claimed her family's sanity, but had woven themselves into the very fabric of their existence. Ellie's resolve hardened into a desperate determination. She had to confront whatever malevolent force was haunting her family before it consumed her completely. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The hidden room's chilling revelation weighed heavily on Ellie as she clutched Lydia's diary. The air in the basement seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, thick and suffocating. Ellie's mind raced as she tried to piece together the cryptic message left by her aunt. The whispers, now a relentless barrage of torment, had become unbearable. Determined to face the entity head-on, Ellie steeled herself for what lay ahead. With a sense of grim resolve, Ellie ventured to the grand, decaying foyer of the estate. The whispers swirled around her, growing louder with every step. The once subtle presence of the shadowy figure had become more pronounced, an ominous silhouette that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The estate itself felt like it was closing in on her, the walls narrowing as if to contain the horror that had taken root. "Enough!" Ellie shouted, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "I know you're there. I want answers. What is it you want from me?" The whispering ceased abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the house. The shadowy figure materialized in the corner of the room, its form now grotesquely human-like, with twisted features and eyes that glowed with a predatory light. It seemed to leer at Ellie with a malevolent satisfaction. The voice, now a disembodied roar, filled the room. The debt must be paid. The bloodline must fulfill its obligation. Only then will the whispers cease. Ellie's heart pounded as the realization sank in. Curse was not merely a haunting, it was a demand, a malignant force that sought something only her family could provide. She tried to reason with the voice, her words tumbling out in a frantic plea. "I don't understand. What do you want from me? How can I stop this?" The entity's response was a chilling, mocking laugh that filled the house with an oppressive, cold breath. The physical manifestations of its wrath became apparent almost immediately. Ellie felt a sharp pain as an unseen force pushed her down the stairs, her body tumbling and slamming against the wooden steps. Her skin bore bruises and scratches from invisible hands, each mark a painful reminder of the spirit's power. Desperation drove Ellie to her feet, her defiance burning bright against the overwhelming darkness. She staggered through the house, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The shadowy figure followed, its form more defined, almost corporeal now, its grotesque features twisting with every movement. It seemed to mock her struggle, its presence a constant, oppressive weight on her shoulders. The house itself seemed to conspire against her. Doors slammed shut with deafening force, and cold drafts cut through the air like knives. Ellie's fear transformed into a fierce determination. She realized that there was no escaping the curse. It was intertwined with her bloodline, an inescapable fate. The estate was not just a haunted house, it was a prison. As Ellie fought to maintain her resolve, the cold, the wind, and the whispers became symbols of her internal struggle. They echoed her deep-seated guilt and grief, the fear of becoming like her grandmother, trapped in a legacy of torment and madness. The entity's relentless pursuit mirrored her own fight against the shadows of her past. Ellie's breath came in desperate gasps as she faced the shadowy figure, her defiance unwavering. The estate's oppressive silence seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. She knew that confronting the darkness within the house was her only chance to break the cycle of fear and suffering that had plagued her family for generations. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Ellie's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she staggered through the darkened corridors of the estate. The relentless cold, and the howling wind outside felt like they were closing in on her, amplifying the suffocating fear that gripped her. The shadowy figure had vanished into the darkness, but the sense of its presence lingered, a heavy weight on her shoulders. Desperate for answers, Ellie returned to the hidden room in the basement. The diary lay open on the desk, the last entry still fresh in her memory. She rifled through the remaining belongings, searching for anything that might shed light on the spirit's origins. Her hands trembled as she unearthed an old, leather-bound book hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Flipping through the brittle pages, Ellie found accounts of the Harrington family's dark past. The revelations were chilling. Her great-aunt Lydia, whose spirit now tormented the estate, had been sacrificed by the Harringtons in a desperate attempt to lift a curse that had haunted their bloodline for generations. The family's actions had only deepened the darkness, binding Lydia's vengeful spirit to the estate. The whispers and shadows were manifestations of her unresolved anger and the debt that remained unpaid. Ellie's vision blurred as the full gravity of the situation crashed over her. The cold, the whispers, the shadowy figure, it was all part of a malevolent scheme set in motion by her own family. Her ancestors had sacrificed Lydia, not realizing that their attempt to end the curse would only ensure its continuation. Reality seemed to warp around her as the lines between past and present began to blur. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation. It was an oppressive force that invaded her mind, distorting her thoughts and memories. Ellie's grip on reality weakened. She began to question if she was still in the present or if she was reliving the horrifying past. The spirit's influence was growing stronger, merging with her consciousness as if trying to take over her very being. The roar of the entity's voice filled the house, an overwhelming cacophony that drowned out all other sounds. "The debt must be paid," the voice thundered. "You are the last of the Harringtons. Your life is the price." The estate quaked with the force of the spirit's rage, the walls trembling as if in agony. Ellie's mind raced as she grappled with the choice laid before her: sacrifice herself to end the curse, or find a way to appease the spirit without losing her own life. The weight of her family's sins and the prospect of her own demise pressed heavily upon her. Ellie took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She knew that, to end the torment, she needed to confront the curse head-on. Her choices were limited, but she refused to surrender to the darkness. Summoning every ounce of strength, she resolved to defy the spirit's demands, hoping to find a way to break the cycle of suffering without paying the ultimate price. The estate's oppressive silence was shattered by the deafening roar of the entity, the cold whisper, now a force of pure terror. Ellie braced herself for the final confrontation, her heart pounding as she prepared to face the malevolent spirit and the dark legacy of the Harrington family. Chapter 7: The Sacrifice. Ellie stood in the basement's hidden room, her breath forming icy clouds in the freezing air. The room's contents, Lydia's belongings, and the diary's disturbing revelations were now scattered around her. The ancient book had detailed a ritual that, according to its final entries, could bind the spirit and end the curse once and for all. Desperation drove Ellie to prepare the ritual, her hands trembling as she set about her grim task. The ritual was simple, in theory, but daunting in execution. Ellie needed to burn the items in the room, each symbolizing a fragment of Lydia's life and the cursed legacy of the Harringtons. She arranged the objects in a pile in the center of the room, the cold around her intensifying as if the house itself were bracing for the impending conflict. As Ellie struck the match and set the pile ablaze, the house reacted with violent fury. The walls groaned, and the temperature plummeted to a bone-chilling degree. Ellie's breath came in visible puffs, as she struggled to keep the flames alive amidst the freezing cold. The whisper, once a mere murmur, escalated into an agonizing scream that reverberated through the estate, clawing at her sanity. The shadowy figure materialized with terrifying intensity. Its form was now a grotesque amalgamation of distorted features, eyes blazing with an infernal light. It roared with rage, the sound a deafening crescendo that drowned out everything else. The figure lunged at Ellie, its presence a malevolent force that sought to drag her away from the ritual site. Ellie's heart raced as she fought to keep her focus on the flames. She could feel the entity's icy grip on her shoulders, pulling her back with a strength that seemed to come from the very fabric of the house. The air crackled with supernatural energy, and the whispering turned into a cacophony of tortured voices. It was as if the spirit was unleashing all its fury in one final attempt to thwart her. In the midst of the chaos, Ellie's thoughts turned to her family's history, the fear and sacrifice that had haunted the Harrington bloodline. She understood now that breaking this cycle required more than just physical effort. It demanded a profound confrontation with her own fears. The cold that had once symbolized her dread now represented her resolve. She had to embrace it, knowing that enduring this pain was the price of ending the curse. Ellie pushed through the spirit's relentless assault, her determination hardening. As the flames roared and the shadowy figure writhed in anger, she made a conscious choice to confront her fear rather than flee. With a final, defiant yell, she threw her weight into maintaining the ritual's integrity, hoping against hope that the fire would cleanse the estate of its malevolent presence. The heat from the flames surged, battling against the encroaching cold. Ellie's resolve was unshakable, her willpower a beacon amidst the darkness. The ritual reached its climax, the flames engulfing the remnants of the cursed past. The house shuddered violently, the anguished scream of the spirit echoing through its walls. As the fire consumed the last of the cursed objects, the oppressive cold began to lift. The shadowy figure's roar diminished to a distant, echoing cry. Ellie collapsed to her knees, exhausted but resolute. The house was silent now, the malevolent presence gone. She had faced her fears and broken the cycle of torment that had plagued her family for generations. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The flames had died down to embers, leaving only a smoldering pile of ash and the scent of charred wood in the basement. Ellie sat on the cold floor, her back against the wall, watching as the last traces of the cursed objects turned to dust. The oppressive cold that had pervaded the estate seemed to lift, though a lingering chill clung to the air, a spectral reminder of the curse that had been bound and burned. The house was eerily quiet, the silence heavy and almost tangible. The once menacing shadows seemed to retreat into the corners, and the walls, though still worn and weathered, no longer felt like they were closing in on her. Ellie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the ordeal lift from her shoulders. The spirit's final scream had faded into the past, leaving behind an uneasy stillness. Despite the house's apparent return to normalcy, Ellie could not ignore the lingering cold that permeated her bones. It was as if the estate had accepted her as its new guardian, and the chill was now a part of her, an ever-present reminder of the darkness she had faced. Her mind replayed the haunting events, the spectral figure's rage, and the intense fear that had driven her to the brink of madness. Ellie decided to stay in the estate, confronting the realization that the whisper had not merely been a curse, but a message from the past, a reminder of the profound impact history can have on the present. She wandered through the house, touching the worn wooden surfaces and examining the faded photographs of her ancestors. There was a new sense of understanding and connection to her family's history, a mixture of pain and strength that came with knowing the full extent of their legacy. The nights were still cold, but Ellie found solace in the estate's quiet. She had come to see the house as a symbol of her own resilience. The whisper had become a part of her own narrative, a reminder of her bravery and the sacrifices made to end a dark chapter in her family's history. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the silence in the estate was occasionally interrupted by a faint whisper, barely perceptible. It was different now, softer, almost familiar. Ellie would pause, her heart catching in her throat, and listen. The whisper seemed to carry a hint of comfort rather than fear, as if the spirit's anger had been replaced by a lingering, personal connection. One evening, as she sat alone in the dimly lit living room, she heard the whisper again, closer than ever before. It was almost a call, a gentle murmur in the cold air. She responded quietly, her breath visible in the chill. "Hello?" she whispered back. The scene faded to black, leaving the whisper hanging in the air. Had Ellie truly put an end to the curse, or had she become part of the estate's enigmatic history? The novel closed with a haunting ambiguity, leaving readers with a lingering sense of unresolved tension. The line between freedom and entrapment remained blurred, and the estate's legacy continued to echo in the cold, silent whispers of the past.